Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Sometimes Adriana wondered maybe her mom had given birth to her for nothing. It never crossed her mom's mind. On the contrary, she praised. Everyone advised her to get rid of the child. No profession, no job, no roof over her head, but she never lets a cigarette out of her mouth. Almost every day she gets drunk in one company or another. She stays the night where she drank. Yes. Does she even know who is the father of her unborn child? Not a wench, who she herself calls bikers. And people talk about such brave people who ride their motorcycles on the roads. And they say, shuddering meat. At what speed, if something happens, you can't gather guests. And I spit on everyone and gave birth to you, proudly said my mother, Miranda. And it must be said that she had a baby. Miranda has settled down nicely. No, in other people's eyes, she's still the same unattached person. Compared to her old self, the change was dramatic. Miranda and her daughter had taken up residence in the caravan. In the housing trailer was not a friend of the owner of the campground. There were different housing for those who are richer than mom, wooden houses, simplified versions of the cheapest, where you could settle trailers. The first thing that Adriana remembered in her life, such an old trailer, she was crawling on a disassembled bed. All around, windows left and right in the back, and even overhead. And in front on both sides are lockers. If they have doors open, she shared. 2 rooms on one half, Adriana on the other half, where there is a table and 2 chairs. Miranda is alone or with any of the guests. They drink beer and listen to music. Sometimes the Marquis falls asleep on a padded chair, dropping his head on the table. If it rains, he drums on the metal lodge. There you are sitting in a tin can and you're being hosed down. But the worst is if it's cold outside. Here are the heavy blankets and the survivors warm themselves under them. Adriana sleeps in a jacket and still wakes up at night from the fact that she is cold. Can't feel her arms or legs. She learned early to turn on the boiling pot, warms her tea in a half-liter jar. Some French commission would have killed Miranda for good. The child did not do everything that children are strictly forbidden to do. Grips the scepter jar with a towel, pours himself into a cup, gets drunk on his mom and puts her to bed. And if any of mom's friends get the urge to talk, Time sits in front of the TV6, listens obediently and nods. And some overgrown bearded man in Denmark with skulls sympathizes and strokes her head. And the ruling man will take a chocolate bar out of his pocket. Adriana went to school when they moved. A mother of someone's dead daughter, because Adriana never met her grandparents, had an inheritance. Miranda left for a few days, entrusting her daughter to friends who lived in the same neighborhood. Adriana recalled sitting around the fire with them until late at night. She was a remarkably obedient child, and later she wondered why. Not in Miranda, she went to the character that not only do not put your finger in your mouth, she did not know any restraint. Perhaps it was the father, about whom Miranda never once dropped a word to her daughter. He was a quiet and shy young man. That shyness became the only thing she left as a legacy to Adriana. Miranda returned the same as ever. Her stamp had died. She did not grieve. On the contrary, she was unaccustomedly excited and said that they were now going to buy a room for themselves. The deal went through very quickly, and it wasn't 2 weeks before they moved in. It had been a blow to Adriana. She reflected on it all later when she was older. Probably the money her mother had been given was very little and only enough for such a place to live. The oldest stock of the house, which no one will ever repair, is easier to demolish. A room of 15 square meters, gloomy palaces on all sides, surrounded by the same shabby houses. The entrance is shabby. It's like a horror movie. A long, narrow corridor painted blue. Chassis is falling off in places and 8 doors. 6 rooms. Shared kitchen and restroom. A bathroom so horribly filthy that none of the tenants ever tried to do anything about it. Maybe the others went somewhere else to bathe. Adriana remembered her mom washing in a basin in her room. And then those who lived downstairs would come to complain that they had a wet spot on the ceiling. It was cramped and cold, but there was nature all around. Mom's friends were there. And here it's gloomy, the sun never peaks on the north side, and there's not a blade of grass in the yard. At home, there are mean aunts all around. One of them was counting on buying the room Miranda took from her for a pittance. And that same aunt hated her new daughter. Miranda, you could always bullshit. You went into the kitchen without fear. The other women sensed it, and this one can do anything. She'll take a mitt, and a light to the forehead, only a buzz will go off. Letter in her presence only pressed her lip, showing that she is a stranger to them, and will never become her own. And Adriana was afraid to go out into the corridor, and not even to warm up poison for herself. She ate cold what her mother left her, like a mouse, sneaking to the toilet and back again and sitting on the wide windowsill. Sits and peeks out. Is Miranda coming? What else is there to do? Adriana couldn't read at that time. She didn't have any. Miranda had no books and no TV. Now it seemed to Adriana that it was always raining outside the window. But of course it couldn't be like that. It was just the mood though, as if it was always raining and slushy. When it was time to go to school, her mother took Adriana to the nearest school, the one in the next yard. At that time, Miranda was already working in a wine and tincture store. It wasn't really a store, but a kind of bar. Of course, there were also those who came in for takeaway wine. Miranda poured it from small kegs into plastic bottles, but they were always sticking out. Here, at high tables, men bought wine, and more often tinctures. They talked among themselves for hours, and there was such a smell in the air that you didn't need to ask anyone. It was clear that everyone was drunk. On a platter were lollipops, small ones in brightly colored wrappers. They were free for anyone who bought a drink as an appetizer. But that kind of snack never tempted the men. And Miranda brought Adriana these candies every night. But with the school uniforms, it was a bummer. Friends occasionally gave her something that their own children had grown out of. Miranda didn't know anything about it at all. To her, these things were from another planet. She herself wore jeans so ripped that sometimes she would fall through a hole in a pant leg and t-shirts with provocative inscriptions. It was good that at work it was necessary to wear a deaf robe on top, because from what was written on Miranda across her chest, sometimes even men began to blush and blink. But before taking her daughter to school, Miranda took out of the bag some dark dress, twirled it over the top, and decided that it was quite suitable for school. And the shoes over there are still quite intact, not falling apart. The only thing Miranda bought for her daughter was a very beautiful bow, like a huge butterfly, with white ribbons like curls coming down from it. Adriana spent the whole evening looking at it. She was afraid to breathe on it. Miranda didn't even think of a bouquet for her teacher. September 1st was a disaster for Adriana. She was too different from the other guys that came dressed up in all the new crisp, ogled schoolyard, drowned in flowers, sounded cheerful music, and Adriana stood red with embarrassment. And in her eyes searched despair. One of the girls who happened to be with her, next to her, clutched her nose. It stinks though. Adriana didn't smell it herself, but maybe she picked up the scent of the old house. Or maybe it was the smell of the bundle of things that one of her mom's friends had brought, and where Miranda had pulled the dress from. Adriana couldn't remember if her mom had washed it or not. But it was worth it to say such one girl, as all the future classmates began to defiantly shuffle away from Adriana. It was a game to them. The same continued after the classroom lineup. I won't sit with her. And me, Nina, she stinks. Jesus. The young teacher's head was already spinning. Okay, what's your name? Let Adriana stay here alone for a while. Teacher, I had a lot of things to do. She had to tell the kids what to bring to class tomorrow. Answer questions from the parents, the table at the door. And yet, when everyone was leaving, she stopped Adriana, who wanted to slip away unnoticed. Wait, tell Mom to buy you back today. I'll wash your clothes. And tell her to be more careful tomorrow and start looking after yourself. You don't want everyone laughing at you. On top of Adriana's misfortune, her bow and her main treasure were stolen. Coming home, the girls sobbed until the evening. Talking to Miranda did not lead to anything. The mother threatened to come to school and kick out all those who hurt her daughter. They wouldn't say a second time, she assured her. That's the 10th way around. And she couldn't imagine what her life would be like if everyone started going around her, even the second road, or the 3rd, not the 10th. "Teach me how to do laundry," she asked her mother quietly. "Well, and ironing too." Soon the girl was fully able to take care of herself. Now she stood for a long time in front of a small mirror, looking at herself from all sides. Whether all the button caught did not prevent the skirt from looking neat. It had become her mania. But whether the first impression was the strongest, or whether the smell of the old house was ineradicable, Adriana was never able to make any friends at school. She was shunned by everyone. She did not study better or worse than others. She did her lessons as diligently as she watched her clothes and brought fours faithfully. Once in a while we interspersed and triples, if the control was given, too difficult. And the teacher with a clear conscience stopped paying attention to her. The girl is quiet, inconspicuous girl does not get twos. Nana, of course, saw that in the eyes of the whole class Adriana became an outcast. She tried several times to talk to the children about how important it is to live in friendship, and that in a good team no one should be left out. But our conversations had no effect on the kids, and the teacher stepped in. It was easier that way. She reassured herself about the fact that there is no hand-wringing in her class, and no one beats Adriana, and that she was not loved. It's impossible to make people love her. In addition, the girl behaves quite reasonably, does not pester classmates, does not seek their favor. She seems to have accepted her loneliness. Probably finish her studies, and then will go to some technical school or college. Maybe they'll treat her differently. Has Adriana completely faded away? No one had ever heard her laugh, knew nothing about her life outside of school. Not once had she raced with the other girls. It went unnoticed by everyone. It happened when Adriana entered 6th grade. Later, she asked herself why she did it. The principal had instituted new rules at the school, and the cafeteria was no longer open. Now you could only buy a full lunch. 1st, 2nd, 3rd. There were families where parents thought it was expensive and stopped giving their children money for food. In the morning breakfast, and well, they said to their children, "And come after school, you will have a home-cooked lunch." They got a nerve. At school, they only make money. What happened in practice? By noon, those children who stopped going to the canteen were already hungry for a snack and asked their classmates to bring a couple of pieces of bread to the canteen. Yes, the cook swears it's unnoticeable. Adriana hadn't eaten with everyone since 1st grade. She didn't want to be attacked in the cafeteria. She convinced Miranda that the food at school was bad. So her mother started putting something for her to eat. A sandwich, an apple. And that day, Adriana just felt sorry for her classmate Sophia, a girl from a dysfunctional family with many children. Sophia, as usual, asked the boys for bread, and they all refused. When the class was empty, Adriana took sandwiches out of her bag. "I'll have 2. Sophia took the treat, brought it to her mouth, then grimaced defiantly and ran to throw the sandwich in the trash. "What stinks? Did you find it in a dumpster?" The sandwich only smelled like Krakow sausage, but Adriana imagined what would happen next. Sophia would come back from the cafeteria and tell everyone that the stinker wanted to poison her. Slip the sandwich she found at the dump, and the whole class will be happy to pick up the Nunenka. All the fun in the middle of a long day filled with boring lessons. And for Adriana, this was probably the last straw. She thought Sophia was a kind of outcast too, always poorly dressed. And her scandalous mother comes almost every week to argue with the teacher and the boys. And it all seems that her daughter is being abused. That's why Sophia is disliked in the class and tries not to get in touch with her. And now she's decided to get popular at Adriana's expense for leading the bullying that's already started. My head hurts. Threw Adriana the teacher, bumping into her in the doorway, and didn't give her a chance to stop herself, afraid she'd burst into tears in front of everyone. She hadn't done that in a long time. But then she finally collapsed. Adriana ran out of the school, tightening her coat as she went, thinking only that it was Friday and she wouldn't see her nasty classmates until Monday. Miranda arrived late as usual. Her store closed at 11, and she was home by midnight. Sometimes jokingly stating that every day was like a holiday, considering that more and more often she ended the day cheerful. It was believable. She started with a light artillery of apple and cherry cider, and sometimes even draught champagne, and ended with cognac. A true wine connoisseur would have been head over heels for that stuff. But Miranda, at the present moment of her life, was fine, and there were no traces of excesses on her face yet. She still resembled a Frenchwoman. Loose hair, light eyes under the wings of her eyebrows, thick silk, a laughing mouth. Quite a few customers came not only to have a drink, but also to chat with Miranda and treat her, of course. Usually by the time her mother arrived, Adriana was asleep on the stove. Miranda was waiting. No surprise dinner, boiled potatoes, fried cutlets, spoon or macaroni and cheese. But on the table, without fail, there was a lamp burning. It was the only thing Miranda had taken from the maternity ward. Or maybe it belonged to her grandmother too. It was a snow-covered marble house with small windows on 3 sides of the world. Adriana was used to falling asleep looking at it, and it seemed that she was not alone in the room. And whoever was now sitting there in the hut was also brooding and dreaming and waiting for her to come through the door. But I can't. I am too big, he is too small, and we will always wait for each other. Adriana thought. Miranda's heart snapped when she saw that the room was dark and the earpiece was off. She slammed her palm on the light switch. There was no doubt there was trouble. God forbid. Adriana knew she was missing at home. She was greatly relieved to see her daughter sitting in the old armchair by the window, albeit crying, but alive here. The fatigue returned. What's wrong? She asked but already only sobs dragged. You can hear it thinly. Come on, Miranda ruffled her hair. She didn't have the energy now to pry into her daughter's soul, to find out why she was in a bad mood. I just wanted to lie down and sleep, and the floor beneath her feet shook slightly. Adriana knew that her mother would not have a heart-to-heart talk with her. She never had, and she never would now. Can I get someone, she asked. In her mind, she said it all, that she couldn't be alone anymore, that she didn't have a single friend, and no longer had the strength to bear the ridicule of the whole world against her. From the looks of it, Miranda wondered, You mean like a puppy or a kitten? Adriana nodded, continuing to stare out the dark window where the rain was running down. Animals were so out of Miranda's range of interest that it took her a moment to concentrate, as if she'd been given a difficult math problem to solve. Well, I don't know, she mused doubtfully. The neighbors probably chewed us out completely then. No, but the girl looked at her mother with those suffering such eyes. That Miranda first noticed from Adriana, only those huge eyes remained. Then the kitten with him at least do not need to walk. You will be less likely to be seen by those harmful grandmothers. So cats don't bark or chew on shoes. She said yes. Adriana hugged her, snuggled up to her, breathed out her native scent. She has no one but her mom. And Miranda's heart ached. How thin is her daughter? She'll never ask me. Yes, she does. She forgets about it. Maybe I'll get her some. They used to give children cahors when they were bleeding. The other day was Saturday, so there was a chance on weekends at the town market. They were selling all sorts of animals: abalone, aquarium, noya, fish, birds, cats, dogs. Adriana didn't have much money. She was saving a little bit from the bills that gave her to go to the nearest grocery store. But the girl knew that it wasn't uncommon for native animals to be given away for free to good hands. Miranda was still asleep when Adriana slipped out of the apartment after a quick cup of coffee. To keep her mother from worrying, she left a note, went to the market, and put it by the electric kettle. Miranda did the same. The first thing she did in the morning was drink coffee, so all sorts of things will be seen. Of course, the most tempting thing is the unattainable. For the 5th time, Adriana walked past a lady who had a white poodle sitting behind her back. I didn't know he was for sale. He was sure the owner, his family. They are one stuck in this strange place and will go home. The owner peeked out from under his jacket, his sharp nose looking around with curiosity. The landlady was asking for a lot of money. Maybe the puppy would go home this time. There'd be no one willing to take him for that price. Cats, as it turned out, weren't doing so well. They were offering pedigree cats. It was clear that Adriana didn't have enough money for either the Zemstvo or that Persian. But a man who was passing by winked at Adriana. Do you want one? Little one. I'll send you these in the nearest yard to catch at least in a sack." Adriana shook her head and backed away fearfully. Even though Miranda had friends, she had firmly instilled in her daughter that you shouldn't go anywhere with strange children offering you a puppy or a kitten. And then she saw her old lady sitting a little farther away from everyone. She was dressed in such a way that she was attracted by some old vest, vicious silver fur, green hat with a green pie. Adriana had never seen anyone wear a hat with a feather in her life. Except in fairy tales, the old lady also had round glasses. She looked like an old intellectual who was a little crazy or a little drunk. That was something Adriana was good at. In front of the old lady was a cage of rats, 4 of them. The white rats lived their own lives, paying little attention to people or to what was going on around them. "Come here," the old woman said. Adriana didn't even immediately realize it was for her. But even a crazy grandmother is not a stranger. Adriana timidly approached. "Give me your hand," the old woman said. She took Adriana's hand and opened the window in the cage. "Hold out your hand to the rats. Don't be afraid, they won't bite. Girls." I wanted to say that she didn't need a rat, and in general she was afraid. Adriana was too timid and more often than not preferred not to object. When her palm found itself in the cage, the rats were interested, reaching to cash in. Adriana could barely keep from shrieking and yanking her hand away from their tiny wet noses and the sharp yellow of their teeth. Then one of the rats jumped right into her palm. "Take it," said the old lady. "Give me some money." "What have you got? What's a nickel?" "All right, come on." The old lady began to rummage through her clothes. Whether the pocket where she wanted to hide the coin was somewhere deep, at least under 20 sweater. "But I don't want a rat. I don't like rats." "Adriana don't like, but you need that rat," said the old woman. She emphasized the last words in her voice, and Adriana, again, did not dare to argue. "Is it a girl or a boy?" Adriana asked hopelessly. "It is. It's probably both." The old woman thought for a moment. She was crazy. She had no choice. "What's the name?" Adriana didn't add his or hers. "Riches. And now I'm left with 1 boy and 2 girls." "That's right. His name is Talent and theirs is Power and Love. And at home I have more luck and health and happiness." The old woman was already muttering something to herself, sinking back into thoughtfulness. Had with her a purse sewn from multicolored. We had planned to carry the kitten home in it. Now the rat was on his way. All the way he was unusually quiet. Only in the shuttle bus, when Adriana held the purse on her lap, she felt that in it there was something soft and heavy, sticky and moving. Adriana sighed and imagined what the guys would say if they found out that Adriana was friends with a rat none other than the rat herself would nickname her. The other thing was that she wouldn't tell anyone about her pet. And how else would her mom feel about him? "Oh, God, gross, throw it away," Miranda shouted. Adriana clutched the bag to his chest. If anything, dealing with the rat was a simple matter of tossing it into the nearest dumpster. And that was it. Either it would take root there, or the first window it hit would break it. But Adriana couldn't throw away a living thing. "Did you pay money for it too?" Mom looked at Adriana compassionately like a miserable nickel. The girl whispered. Miranda sighed as deeply as if she was trying to hold back sobs. "Okay," she said, standing up. "That thing is going to need a cage, isn't it?" "Probably," Adriana agreed with a guilty look. A cage was an extra expense. She was well aware of that. "I think I saw an old bird cage in the basement." "Sit down. I'll get it myself. I know you're afraid to go in there." The basement was all through the house, damp and dark. Every tenant had a storeroom or carcass down there. The basement smelled of guts and pickles. Adriana was afraid to go there even with her mom and a flashlight. Miranda had actually seen a dusty old cage there. Maybe it belonged to someone, or maybe the owner had long since died or moved away. Miranda was ready to scramble. If someone decided to take that cage away from her, or at the very least, pay her. After all, the rat was the only thing her daughter had asked of her. "Here," said Miranda, bringing the cage into the room. With a wet rag, she dusted it. "I really hope this thing escapes from it and jumps into your bed in the morning," said Adriana, and went to wash the rat's apartment. "What is rat's name?" Adriana decided not to tell her mother. Miranda was able to laugh absolutely mercilessly at times. At such moments, the girl made a vow to herself that she would not tell her mother again. Nothing, ever. She swore many times. The first time she broke her vow. The rat escaped the next day in the evening. Adriana sat late at night near the cage, held out the breadcrumbs to the whelp, and he took them with flexible legs, with long pink fingers, and chewed so appetizingly that Adriana almost forgave her new friend the fact that he was a rat. I guess so. She could carry him in her arms. In time, when she got used to it. And first thing in the morning, Adriana rushed to the cages and saw that it was empty. Only in one place were the bars a little loose. Adriana gasped in grief. He had escaped. She had never raised her voice. And here straight shouted, "Who ran away with me?" And Miranda rose up on the bed. That thing, thank God. And collapsed back on her pillow to sleep. Is that what you wished for her? Adriana burst into tears for the second time in 2 days. You wished her away. You brought that broken cage. Miranda silently placed one of the pillows on her head so that her daughter's cries would not disturb her sleep. Adriana rushed to search the apartment. She foresaw that if she didn't find a rat in the room, she would have to go to the hallway, to the kitchen, to the neighbors. And after asking if our rat had run in, she and her mom would be fine if they didn't get evicted. Adriana even looked into the hut. Suddenly the rat liked the hut and decided to live there. But inside the marble hut was empty. Only a small light bulb was cold. Not in the closet, not under the couch, not in the dresser anywhere. There was no wealth anywhere. Adriana lay down on the floor and looked under the old nightstand left by the previous owners. And there in the wall was a hole, a black hole with smooth edges, just like Georgians with someone's sharp bags. Mom, give me the flashlight phone. Are you gonna let me sleep or not? Miranda's totally pissed off. God, 1 day a week. Get off, get off, get off. She tried to get comfortable in bed so that she could go back to sleep, but there was no way she could do it. Adriana and her phone were already in Crazen's eyes, and damn it, there seemed to be glimpses of someone's eyes, or maybe teeth, deep down there. Adriana, you found your rat without grabbing it with your bare hands. Miranda's resigned to the futility of her attempts to sleep. She pulls you to wring your hand with my scarf. You'd think in that little hole. She'll be able to slip her hand around a muddy, thick, dirty scarf. It would be good to at least walk like that again. Forgetting her fear, Adriana dived her hand into the resulting hole. It was unexpectedly deep, and there. Yes, there was a soft, warm body, rats, and something else. Some object with hard edges. But in the same instant, Adriana realized that it was impossible to try to get it out now because her mother would intervene. And then whatever was found, there would be Mommy's first and foremost. But after all, it wasn't him who was being bullied at school, it wasn't her who was sobbing. So he didn't have the strength to breathe. The breath came out like a moan. It wasn't her who drove to the market at dawn and talked to the crazy old lady. Adriana had only pulled a rat out of the burrow. There it is. Or did it hide and sit there quietly? Found it. Well, calm down. I'll fix the cage and then maybe we'll get him a glass aquarium. Miranda reluctantly walked barefoot across the floor. A new day was beginning. War herself didn't quite understand why she had put off her exploration of Brandy until the next day. She wished she was home alone. Maybe then a miracle would happen. And if not, and in a beautiful hole will be some nonsense, for example. For example, the same old truth, ajar, and even empty. Then there will be no one to laugh at it with hopes like a little child. And all Sunday afternoon, Adriana looked anxiously at her mother. Would she not start cleaning? Would she scrub the floors, pushing the furniture aside? But Miranda cleaned purely on inspiration, and it had not visited her today. She was once again on the subject of the dirty bathroom after going in there, wanting to chlorine Miranda. It had been a day when she didn't like everything around her, and the shabby kitchen was always crowded with these gossipy women. And outside the window is such a dreary, hopeless landscape that you want to become Raskolnikov, as in Dostoevsky's novel, and grab an axe. Eventually, Miranda wrapped the curtains and settled down again. This time, though, to watch a movie. Tropics, endless beaches, young, beautiful characters, love like no other. This was what was dear to Miranda's heart and what carried her from the gloomy slush of fall to the world she wanted to be in. Now everything around her seemed amazing. She was doing the usual things, cooking soup on the stove, washing dishes, doing her homework, and everything was going well for her. If she had been home alone, she would have been humming as well. Miranda had told her daughter 100 times that she had no voice and no ear. But sometimes singing isn't about musicality at all. It's about a state of mind. Rat was behaving quite normally, no longer trying to escape. He often rose on his hind legs, held onto the bars of the cage with his front ones, and watched what Adriana was doing. And the girl felt as if she had a conspirator in the family. The next day it was time to go to school. Usually Adriana saw Monday as an Egyptian execution. There was still a whole week ahead of her, full of endless lessons. And most importantly, bullying, classmates, and general rejection. But now the girl lived with one thing: when she would return and be home alone. What will happen then? She thought only about it. And it seemed so detached, immersed in his thoughts. It was as if it did not exist. And her classmates began to tease the dummy for the first time. It wasn't interesting at all. The teacher was trying to find out why Adriana had run away on Friday without waiting for the end of class. Sophia stayed nearby and behaved very defiantly. She thought Adriana would complain about her and prepared to fight back, using all kinds of arguments. It's not my fault that Vanechka eats garbage. Just don't offer them to me. But Adriana only shrugged her shoulders at the teacher's questions. I don't remember why I left. I think I had a headache. You should have gone to the school nurse. Well, I'll do that next time. But as soon as the last bell rang, Adriana was gone. She told herself she was just worried about the rat. How he'd be all day without her. She was afraid to admit to herself that she had put everything on the line. She expects to find something extraordinary in the rat's hole and just can't bear to be disappointed. The rat greeted her with some strange sound reminiscent of Vanya's quiet Paris. It was as if he was tired of waiting and was rushing her. But now Adriana was in a hurry too, even though she knew for sure that Miranda would not come before 12 o'clock in the morning. Adriana only threw off her jacket, and then with an effort pushed the massive old nightstand away from the wall, looked at the rat hanging opposite the cage, and ran her hand down the hole. Deep to her elbow moments later, she had already extracted the box into the light. She sat down directly on the floor and began to examine it, noticing that her hands were trembling. The casket was of injured metal. A pattern appeared between the edges. The lock was obviously nothing a new fingernail could pick up and flip off. But Adriana slowly, although inside there was clearly something lying, she turned the box over and saw the date 1865 engraved on the bottom. Clearly the box had been made then. But the house where she and her mother lived now wasn't that old. Adriana wondered for the first time who had lived in this room before her, and why he had thought to brick up the box in the wall and take it away afterward. Maybe something tragic had gotten in the way, and he hadn't had the time. Adriana took a deep breath, effortlessly managed the lock, and left the lid. That's where her breath broke. The tale continued. Indeed, someone had decided to entrust eternity with jewelry, rings, and a brooch of artistic work with large stones. The bracelet seemed to be made of sparkling lace. So delicate was the metallic ligature of the pattern, and so many of the shouting stones carried away a strand of pearls. But it was the simple oval pendant that caught Adriana's attention. It was shaped like the same box in miniature and just as easy to open. And inside was, yes, it was a portrait, an antique miniature, a child. Adriana couldn't even tell if it was a boy, a girl, black curls, a white shirt, and the look of big eyes, at once helpless, trusting, and commanding. Adriana realized everything she would give her mom, just not this. She fumbled around the room and didn't immediately realize where to hide the thing. She had her own stash, randomly appearing. Her mom had bought her a cheap writing utensil made of blue plastic. The top was glued on top, also plastic, only a white profile. Adriana put her pens in a special hole, and then she found out that if she pulled it, a small, almost flat drawer would slide out, and then she could hide various small things. And Miranda would be looking for it for the rest of her life. Adriana hid the pendant and then snatched the rat out of the cage and kissed its tiny wet nose, forgetting about the long yellow teeth and the noticeable odor. "Thank you." When Miranda got home, Adriana was awake. She was sitting by the table, and on it stood an open jewelry box. If eyes can burn with excitement, Adriana's eyes were burning. "Why didn't you lie down?" "Easy?" Miranda was surprised and walked over to the table. "What have you got there?" Oh, for a few moments, it looked like weak eyes, glassy or mouth open. Adriana hurriedly explained everything, but in a context acceptable to her mom. Not about the old lady, not about the rats. She didn't even mention it. She said she was cleaning the floor and something got caught. There was a hole in the wall and it was in there. And there it was. Miranda let out a scream. She screamed. It could only be like that in her youth when she was riding her bike like a gorilla. This immediately caused a reaction in the communal apartment. The walls resounded on both sides, and a couple of moments later, also behind the drums or at the door. What happened? What was murdered? Call the police. Evict the hell out of them. Miranda responded with a long florid phrase that had only 2 censored words, old purses, and the rest a recommended route. Where was this purse suggested to go? After that, she called one of her many friends on the phone. "Drop everything and get over here. You don't want to throw a pillow. And I'm your subject here, such tzatziki. Do not ask where this 1001 night." From excitement, Miranda began to swear again, so that Adriana did not understand her at all. The residents of the communal apartment did not manage to sleep that night. One shock after another awaited them. First came a bitterly ambitious man about 40 years old, which the old ladies could see only in a terrible dream. 2 meter tall, broad-shouldered, and all kinds of metal gimmicks, jackets, bearded with a chicken low voice, old ladies, immediately trembling counter, knocked down the kitchen and called the police. While the guards of order rode, bitterly had time to appreciate the treasures found. Harmless jaundice is waiting for the wench. Miranda, don't worry, we'll soon talk it over. He disappeared before the police arrived and took the box with him behind his back. Miranda had been monstrously thoughtless in entrusting what she thought was a real treasure to an old acquaintance. Adriana might have asked her mother to be more careful, but now she saw the treasure as something almost irrelevant to her. Her mother wouldn't have found the metal anyway. When the police arrived, 2 young boys. They had to content themselves with choking old women's speeches about that one time. A companion and 5 fingers pointed ominously at the smirking. And Miranda in the middle of the night taking to her various criminal-type personalities, not embarrassed by the child. Miranda was apparently euphoric. "Would you boys like a drink?" She offered her named guests a drink. They did draw up the paper and sometimes labor to her. It was the first time in her memory that men in uniform had come. She was afraid her mother would be taken away. But Miranda nonchalantly spun away and with a sweet smile. She saw the policemen off like best friends. "What will happen now?" Adriana asked in a trembling voice. "We'll probably pay the fine." Miranda yawned and finally got undressed for the night. "All that stuff. Go to sleep, kitten." Now a new life begins. Much later, Adriana realized that her mother had decided not to make the fine public, but to sell it really through her semi-criminal friends, and really not deceived in the sense that she got even more than she accounted on. Agoric had probably gotten his hands pretty good, but Miranda was satisfied. Adriana never found out exactly how much money her mother had received, but Miranda immediately went with her daughter to the realtors to buy a new apartment, and she acted like a visiting star. In fact, that was all they had enough for. An apartment in a new house, which the mother and daughter both considered. The posh house stood in an upscale neighborhood. There was a rooftop garden and a concierge sitting in the entryway. And Miranda had also bought herself a car, not a new one, as she said, a posh one too. There were a few other little things though, clothes for both of them. And to add to the exuberance, Miranda had a new job. The same David must have been very good at arranging things. And in gratitude tried, arranged Miranda, as not young, very strange character knew one writer. Miranda became his house ruler or something, and in time, his real right-hand woman. It was hard to imagine that she would be suitable for this role, not so well educated, far from being an ideal hostess. She was, however, a good fit. The writer found Miranda amusing, and she did not annoy him at all. The two were a perfect match. Miranda ordered the game that the writer liked. If there was a cleanup job to be done, she'd call the guys from the clinics and the company to keep herself clean. But the writer somehow decided that he needed such a woman in the house, who did not take anything to heart and felt his mood, could be silent all day long, or told various tales that switched with her. In everyday life, the writer was not demanding, only that strong coffee was always at hand. And in the evenings, when Miranda went home, she always left a filled thermos for him. "You'll make your heart race," she warned him. They were almost immediately on a first-name basis, as if they weren't master and servant, buddies. The writer only waved it off. "You should live as if you were riding a motorcycle. Like you told me the other day, if he crashes at such a speed, you won't have to suffer for long. You'll go straight to heaven." Miranda was squinting. Or hell. What could be even more fun? As one good poet Kersakov wrote, "Preparing for. Have a James Harley Davidson and a Derek at the entrance with you. But still, trust me. In every atom, there is a mystery, standing more often than serpents, and one who will one day point himself at the door. Prepare to smoke forever in the fire of the furnace. Prepare yourself. Recall Lily, your sorrow. In every hell there's sweat, saka, bushel, keys, night conversations with sugar, black tea." Miranda nodded and quietly feigned the door behind her. The writer's future did not concern her. What about Adriana? Her mother had immediately taken her out of her old school, not because she wanted to spare the girl from the classmates who had poisoned her for so many years. It's just that there was an equally elite school next to an elite house, and Adriana was enrolled there. It's the closest commute. The school's in the courtyard. You could look out the window to see if the lights were on in your classroom in the morning or not. And it was impossible to imagine that any of the students would be harassed. A class of 15 kids, all roughly well-mannered, and a teacher who looks like Mary Poppins, above everyone. But before that, Adriana could have an hour of triumph if she wanted it. Together with her mother, they went to the school to pick up their papers. It had come to light that their little family had gotten rich. True, no one knew exactly how, but they were walking down the school corridors, Miranda and Adriana in a cool mat, as Sophia told me later, choking on the excess of emotion. "Do you know how much such a jacket costs? Boots, it's awesome in general. Come to think of it, Adriana's not up to it now." Adriana heard that whisper that accompanied her and her mother, but walked on without raising her eyes. She knew she would never willingly stay at the school, even if she started being carried in her arms. And triumphing over those who had wronged her was not something she wanted. Hurry up and get her papers and forget about this place. That's all. In the new school, she was so calm, as if she was surrounded by children from another planet, where there were no such feelings as anger, envy, bullying. If she asked questions, she was greeted with friendly answers from several girls who showed with all their behavior that they were not averse to be friends with her. And the teacher sincerely tried to make Adriana understand the new topic and cope with the control work. The past gradually began to be forgotten. Adriana was surprised to feel the heart itch. Everything was weakening. Some joys of life came to the forefront. She noted that she now behaves like an ordinary girl asking her mother to go with her to the store for this or that cover. From time to time, she stays overnight with one of her new friends and tapes up her room with posters of one of the trendy rock bands. When she moved on to high school, the writer died. And since he had no loved ones, he left a will that passed everything to Miranda, including royalties from his books. Adriana and her mother moved again, now to the deceased's country house. Miranda decided to rent the apartment for the time being. "When you graduate from school and become of age, it will belong to yourself," Miranda promised her daughter. Adriana didn't want to change schools, and now Miranda took her to the start of classes every morning in her new car. Shortly after the writer died and Miranda's inheritance, the rat died as well. It was already a long-lived animal. Miranda didn't recognize the mystery of the animal and didn't understand why her daughter was trying her best to save him. as Adriana tearfully returned from the vet. The rat had grown a large tumor, and surgery only briefly prolonged his days. Shortly after, the rat did not Miranda in a fit of cleaning, and for putting things in order gained just that with gusts. Threw away the old writing utensil along with the antique column. Adriana had not intended to reveal her secret to her mother, but now in desperation she told her what she had lost. Unfortunately, she didn't notice the loss until the next day, and the company that was responsible for cleaning the bins had already cleared their trash, removed early in the morning. A giddy Miranda waved her hand. "We're not going to go through the entire city dump. It's a shame, of course, but that's the way it is." Nothing can be too precious, and Adriana accepted it, though she never told her mother that it wasn't really the jewelry that she was sorry for, but the portrait, no matter how much it cost. In the meantime, the person depicted in the miniature had become her own. When her friends started talking about, "Oh, Adriana's boy," she thought, though it was silly and childish with the one who looked at her from the portrait with big black eyes. They were hopelessly separated in time. That was all. Since then, there were no money-related surprises in their family, but they lived more than prosperously. The writer's books kept coming out, and the bank account kept growing. If Miranda had been accustomed to luxury, she would have successfully spent everything. But she still made do with a rather modest amount, and decided to save the rest for her daughter. At the graduation party, Adriana got drunk for the first time in her life. Former classmates seemed to have thrown off their decency and masks. Young men and women partied in a way they couldn't afford before. Fortunately, it did not have bad consequences for Adriana. She merely fell asleep at dawn and woke up in the evening, popping a headache pill with a cup of coffee. She studied when she was no longer interfered with perfectly and got into the institute without any problems. Miranda didn't approve of her choice. She herself would never go to biology, but she didn't want to get in the way. Better something creative, she sighed. Variety Show Business Literary Institute. Adriana looked at her like a little mom. "But I don't have the aptitude." "Well, yes, but some people manage to make it without any ability. It's just a different life out there. It just picks you up and carries you along. Vivid experiences, interesting people. What's in store for you? You'll spend your life going to the same job in the morning and coming home in the evening. You won't even realize you're trying. I don't know. When you're surrounded by routine, life goes by really fast. 10 years is like a blink of an eye. But why one job? Well, not just one is better. I'd like to find my own business and never give it up." In her 4th year of university, she got married. Adriana didn't want to go anywhere. Going away for the summer would be enough for her practice. She would have preferred to spend the last summer months at home. To sleep well, to lie in the garden with a book and a can of Coca-Cola, to listen to music, and click at least on the phone at all the acquaintances she hadn't had time to see. But Miranda bought her a trip to Turkey and pushed her to vacation almost by force. "It's like you're not even my daughter. But how can you be such a bore, and about the book, and girlfriend nothing but all she kept saying?" Apparently, some higher power heard Miranda. And already on the airplane, Adriana met Frank. He was a businessman, lived in the same city as her, and was also flying on vacation. At first, they stayed close to each other, as they had no other acquaintances here, and then imperceptibly became friends, and then began to spend time together. They decided to get married before Christmas. Frank said that it was the most romantic time, and indeed, everything was beautiful. And Adriana's outfit, in addition to white lace, a new dress was served with a cape for warmth because it was to be photographed in the open air. The cape was reversed with white fur. A country restaurant in an old manor house and a wedding trip to Prague were good. When did they celebrate Christmas in the square? There was mulled wine in their glass. Miranda was alone, but she wasn't sad at all. About the war, even her mother seemed relieved. She now considered her parental duty finally fulfilled and returned to the life she had lived before. Old friends began to visit her, and when Adriana visited her mother, she often forced a raucous party at her place. Adriana received her diploma, but further on there was a hitch for a while. Then for a young woman to go to work in a school was out of the question. "I'm going to lose you." Teaching is a 24-hour-a-day profession, and I want you to belong at least a little to me and our children." Her husband told her seriously. Adriana thought was about a nature reserve, but it would be a long drive to get there. The employees would move, a small village, build houses there or get dorm rooms. Of course, that didn't suit Frank. He couldn't give up his business. The university came together and there was no place in one of the departments. And then we'll see, as Frank said. In his heart, what he wanted most was for his wife to go on maternity leave. He himself was his parents' only son. Growing up, missing his peers and dreaming of having many children in his own family. But Adriana's pregnancy was not coming. Not immediately, but she listened to her husband's entreaties, and they both went to the doctor. Some problems were detected, like on treatment, but nothing helped. The second Adriana thought sadly of the old lady with the rats. That one, of course, was no longer in the world, or else it would be time to go to her and ask for an animal named Mother of Many Children. Then Adriana would probably give birth to 7 at once. A bitter joke. Nothing else occurred to the young woman. Frank talked about going abroad, about the doctors there. And then, as if waving his hand, he listened to the advice of an old acquaintance. "Take a child from an orphanage," she said. "It has happened many times. People will already report. They will take someone else's baby and God will give them their own. The main thing then is not to refuse to accept it." Frank tried to speak in a light tone, but it was obvious that the idea was in his heart from the point of view of all the supervisory authorities. They were ideal candidates, a young, well-to-do couple who lacked only a baby to make them happy. However, they disagreed about the baby. Frank insisted on taking a very young girl, no older than a year, so that the child had no memories of the past, and the baby considered them their real parents. But that's not fair. Adriana objected. "We'll still have to tell the foster child the truth. But why the psychological trauma?" Frank objected. "Because different things happen in life, and a son or daughter, when they grow up, has the right to pull themselves back to their roots. Some drunkard from the back alley, or to a mother who has already cursed her mistakes 100 times, some Prezik, which day after day, year after year, fate puts on the table, that very handkerchief." Frank only waved his hand, not wanting to argue further. In the orphanage, they were really advised to look first not at babies, but at least at children from the younger group, assuring that it is not a cat in a bag. Here will be seen and character and inclinations. At the same time, the children are still small enough to form an inner core, and they will get used to the new environment quickly. Behind was the collection of documents and all sorts of examinations and schools of foster parents. They stood in the playroom very bright, cozy, and around the books crowded about 20 kids in shirts and dresses with puffy tights. Some of them had their finger in their mouth. Someone got tired of looking at unfamiliar uncles and aunts and returned to the game. Frank, looking around confused, and the teacher tried to turn his gaze from one child to another. And to each one she said something nice. "Here's Nadenka. She serves herself and can make a crib. And she always helps me to put toys away in the drawer. She likes books again. He spends hours looking at the pictures. He'll probably be the first to read. A real artist. In all our concerts, she recites poems and reads. She's a very artistic girl." From time to time, Frank looked at his wife, as if asking her advice. But Adriana was silent. And then another boy came out of the bedroom, and she forgot all about it. It was a copy of the child whose portrait in the locket she had kept so long. He looked at her, and Adriana almost shrieked. The same black eyes of the kindergarten teacher noticed the boy too. "This is Alex. He doesn't speak yet, but it's all ahead of him. We're just a little behind the others." "Alex," she said with a sigh. Forgetting about her husband, Adriana approached the boy, squatted down in front of him and asked, "Let's go home." He looked her straight in the eyes and seemed to understand more than he could put into words, even if he spoke. The director of the orphanage was trying to talk them out of it, to make them choose another child. "Why would you, Alex? You can't say you fell in love with him at first sight, can you? It doesn't work that way. He's got a lot of health problems. We don't know if he'll regain his speech, how much. And there are doubts about the boy's mental capacity." Frank's hands are spread out, saying he understands, but there's nothing he can do. His wife's will, and Adriana asked as if she hadn't heard the director. He's an absolute orphan, raised by his young mother. Who's the father? She wasn't exactly sure herself, I don't think. And then she left and disappeared. So how can you be sure he's an orphan? Frank intervened. The mother might still show up and be reinstated as a parent. That's why I'm sure the director stroked the folder on the table with her palm. That the mother's body was found a week later in the river. She drowned herself. The police say that there are no signs of violence. How horrible. Frank exhaled. He had grown up in a well-to-do family and had not come into contact with such horrors. She's not a drug addict, is she? No, she was a young girl. She was not supposed to be good at all. But how could she? Who did she leave her son for? Apparently, she was at a point where she didn't care anymore. Alex then still said his mother said goodbye to him, told him not to be sad for her and left. When he was brought to us, he was waiting for his mother to come for him. And then one of the teachers here said that his mom died. He's been quiet ever since. Now we don't know what to do with him. If he talks, we'll keep him. If not, we'll have to give him to a special boarding school. We won't have to. Adriana said it's settled. We're taking him. But you can't do that right now, can you? It doesn't work that way. We have to make the arrangements. It'll take time. How? Let's get started on the paperwork. Adriana sounded impatient. Let's get this whole thing over with. I'm sure he won't start talking here at your place, but we have good conditions. The director even took offense. Would you look at what happens in other orphanages? Adriana just waved her hand. After a rather heated discussion about the time when they could take Alex away. But why this boy? Frank asked cautiously as they drove home. Because you don't choose your children. It's my child, and that's all. She answered briefly. And Frank could only explain what had happened by saying that the woman must be feeling something. She's carrying the baby. Maybe the wife sensed something too. A sign from above. Alex did not speak for a long time. Adriana was preparing for his arrival. As Frank tried to crack jokes, literally had the whole house out. The kids' room was filled with toys and balloons. Do you think the boy lived in such conditions? Expressively asked Frank, emphasizing the word such. And you think Alex will not be happy about it? With a question to a question, Adriana answered. Frank only shrugged his shoulders. And Adriana was moved to tears when she led the baby into his room, and he froze on the threshold, not daring to cross it, looking at the bouquets of balloons and the crib from the shelves. The toys were like stepping into a fairy tale. He dared to enter only holding Adriana Soroka tightly. This is all yours examines. Everything gets used. And then we'll have lunch, she told him. Also said a festive was and cake, and different fruits. But when Alex finished the milk from the cup, Adriana had a strange feeling. Only now she realized that this was her home and the most necessary person was near her. In the following days, various little things made her heart clench more than once. Now Adriana always took the boy whenever she went anywhere. To the grocery store, or to the store, or for a walk in the park. When she got to the supermarket, she asked Alex, "What do you want?" "To eat." He walked uncertainly along the shelves. Adriana expected Alex to choose sweets or forget about food and reach for the toys in the basket. He saw the soup sachets with the same ones you use to dilute cups of boiling water and excused himself to them like an old acquaintance. He held out a pen and then looked back at Adriana, asking if she could just nod. He took one bag and carried it in his hands to the cash register. Adriana realized that it was a puzzle of his old life and didn't want to tear it up. Since other moms bought their kids chocolates, she threw a bag of quick soup in the basket. Alex ate any pea, chicken, mushroom, cheese soup. Slowly spooning the soup, thick broken grass, the soup as a treat fished out the breadcrumbs. It was neither healthy nor healthy, but to hell with him. Walking behind Adriana like a shadow he didn't annoy, didn't give, didn't demand attention. All he needed was to make her happy. It was as if he had no energy left in him and a child who ran around, made noise, and could never settle down. So he jokingly calls him Energy. If Adriana was reading or sewing, Alex would move next to her, put his head on the wooden cushion and stare at her uninterruptedly. His eyes were big with lashes as long as a girl's. Adriana became worried and took her foster son to the doctor. The therapist, who had to see each child for no more than 10 minutes, found the boy weakened. What kind of nutrition did he have? She advised to feed better, prescribed vitamins. And in the summer we will go to the sea, promised Adriana with her son when they left the clinic. You don't know what that is, do you? Yes. She often now had a feeling that could be described with delight and awe. She was about to open up a world to this little man, of which he had no idea, and the sea and seagulls, and cotton candy and rides, and favorite book characters. Everything he had gotten his hands on. He was making her an all-powerful sorceress. To Frank, the boy only went if the man kissed him and approached, stood obediently by his side, listened to what he was told. But as soon as Frank was silent, Alex would rush to his mother again. Adriana tried to befriend her husband and son. She asked Frank to read to the child, sent them both for a walk. But Frank did it awkwardly. It was as if he was embarrassed in his heart and fiddled with the baby through the village. Alex also felt constrained, and they parted with relief. Next to Adriana, Alex spoke imperceptibly. There was no delay. Apparently, it was just the stress he had been through. His first word was still when Adriana was reading him a book, and it ended. Her throat caught, but she pretended it wasn't a big deal and just reached for another batch of stories. Alex never talked idly, not like the other kids who could hardly keep quiet. He could take Adriana's hand and lead her. Let's go when he wanted to show her something interesting. Or asked for something he needed, let me get a drink. In the summer, they did go to the sea. And there Adriana felt for the first time that her husband was jealous of Alex. He was dissatisfied with the fact that they spend little time together, ski, baby to bed, and go somewhere together. We'll go for a walk. He'll wake up and see that no one is there, and he'll get scared. Adriana objected quietly. Come on, the children sleep soundly, leaving the boss on, and let's go. Let's walk along the waterfront. But Adriana shook her head. Go yourself, please. I'll be glad if you have fun, and you can tell me about it later. And on the beach, she was always near Alex, although before she liked to swim far into the sea, and now she was looking for shells together with the child and building sand sledges. And in excursions, they were now limited. They went only to those where the baby could be with them. You've ruined both of our vacations, Frank said in frustration a few days before we left. And I'm sorry, I don't understand this crazy attachment. I mean, it's still someone else's baby. It's no longer a stranger to me. Adriana rarely dared to confront him openly, and I think you treat your own child the same way. No, I wouldn't. Frank has been touched. I think it would have been subconsciously triggered. He'd feel that his son is the most precious thing between us. And about Alex, we agreed it was a trial run in front of our own kid. Kind of like we're relaxing and getting comfortable with the baby we already have, and then we'll be able to have our own. Adriana, looking at her husband, eyes wide open, said almost with fear, I never thought that you treat a small child as a trial balloon for an experiment. I could already see that this reception was costing both me and all my relatives combined. Frank waved his hand and turned the conversation to another topic, but Adriana saw that her husband was deeply offended. In the evening, when she was putting Alex to bed, he suddenly said, Go out with him, go out with Frank. There was a certain strangeness about it. He didn't call them Daddy, Mommy called them by their first names. Frank had said more than once that it wasn't right, they should relearn it. But Adriana had objected. Perhaps he still remembers his own mother well and realizes that we are strangers. How am I going to leave? Adriana leaned over in the crib. What about you? I will sleep, said the boy and closed his eyes. That evening, Adriana and her husband took a short walk along the waterfront. The young woman was in a hurry to get to the hotel anyway. And Alex insisted that on the last evening Adriana and Frank went to a restaurant. It was supposed to be a romantic evening. Candles on the table, a girl with a violin, young ladies, wine. They danced. Frank embraced Adriana as tenderly as in the first days of their acquaintance. Then she felt uneasy, and they left early for the hotel. The full moon was burning in the sky. It was a stunning evening, but Adriana had everything in front of her eyes. She had poisoned herself and spent the rest of the night in a room from Kirch in a basin. Frank offered to call a doctor, but she refused. It's a common thing in the South. I should just lie down. After all, there's a train tomorrow. Alex, I nursed her until dawn, brought her water, and just held her hand when she thought she was dying. I didn't have to go. If I'd sat next to you and told you stories, nothing would have happened. What kind of a sissy am I? Did I spoil your last night at sea? He gazed into her face with anxious eyes. It was all nothing, just to make you feel better. Sensing that Adriana had raised her head, Frank stood in the doorway and looked at them. How idyllic is this? Well, I won't intrude. And he closed the door. Adriana cried silently, ignoring him and trying to sleep. I'll sit quietly with you, Alex said. When they got home and life seemed to go on as usual, only Frank emphasized not talking about Alex. It was like he was noticing him less and less. Adriana tried to smooth things over. It was painful for her to lose her husband's good attitude, and she was terribly afraid that Frank would want to return the cause of their discord to the orphanage. She tried more carefully than ever to do her homework, asked her husband about his affairs, was constantly attentive to him, but she could not help admitting to herself that her heart was already given to the boy. When Alex went to school in the first school fall, he fell seriously ill. I was playing with the boys. They were pulling each other out of a puddle. The water was icy in November, and they didn't go home right away. Adriana only gasped when her son came in with a wet coat. It did not help, not a hot bath, not a fiery one, but hot tea with honey. The district doctor listened to the boy and gave 24 hours. If it does not get better by tomorrow, he should go to the hospital without talking. But that very evening, Alex got much worse. He began to choke, and Adriana called an ambulance. At the hospital where they were taken, it was still the old-fashioned way. Alex thought he was big and had to lie down without his mother. Adriana was literally on her knees, praying to keep her son. A paid room, anything. At least for the first while, until he was better, I wouldn't get away from him. After all, exhausted. The elderly doctor took pity on them and put both of them in a box, a small glass cage where the regular ones are. In the first few days after admission, mothers with infants were in the hospital. But Alex was really heavy. They put him on IVs. One by one, oxygen was given. And apparently, to take his mind off his suffering, he asked, "Tell a story." And it didn't occur to Adriana when she was going to the hospital to put a book in her bag. And then, in her haste to fulfill the boy's request, she told him about the magic rats. He was the first to hear the story from beginning to end. Of course, he was interested in the treasure that lurked from many years in a secret place. You never found out who lived there, who hid it all. Inexpensive. I had a feeling from the beginning that none of it was mine. I should give it to my mom, whatever she decides. And later, I didn't take an interest in it, but kept it. And the painted boy really looked like me. Like 2 drops of water, she said firmly. She gave it to me very tightly and whispered to me, "I love you." From then on, sometimes, when he was already discharged in the hours they stayed, Alone asked me to tell the story of the rats. Don't you get bored? No, it's true, nobody knows about it. Just the 2 of us, just us. Would you take a rat like that now? You see, nobody asked me. The one that came to me, that's what I took. It was fate, son. He had his hands around my neck. I got everything. I have you. I have love and happiness and wealth. Alex grew up. Daddy never had any children of his own. Losing hope of being a real father. As he talked, Frank convinced his wife to go back to work. You've fallen off the grid. You can't just live a life of domesticity. It's kind of shallow, isn't it? What are you going to remember in your old age, making borscht? You don't want me to sit on your neck, answering questions? What's that got to do with it? Adriana seemed to have completely forgotten what she had learned at school and university. Of course, if she had to remember everything, that wasn't what was important. Work would take up a huge part of her time, energy, and interests. She'd have to take that away from home. Alex, and something was happening to her. It was as if she was always afraid that something might happen to him. That fate would take him away from her. She was afraid for him, not for her husband. Frank spent less and less time at home with Adriana, though, and they no longer quarreled. She tried to please him, avoided asking him questions, and he was condescending and aloof. In high school, Alex became Adriana's second self. They understood each other half-heartedly, and she had no more reliable friend and assistant. Unbeknownst to anyone not at school, he learned to do all the men's work in a labor class, went to help Miranda, who in her old age began to see poorly, took care of her garden. He loved all that beauty. In the spring, he'd bring in boxes of live plants from the grocery store. Most gardeners already have them in season across the river. They won't take them there anyway. And Alex nursed these miraculous living practices. He had some life-giving hands, and the roses bloomed longer than others. And the berries were impossible to pick. I was kind of like a biologist. Adriana said to him with a chuckle to herself, "Maybe you should go into some kind of horticulture. You're clearly inclined, aren't you?" "I don't want to go away. It's a long way to study," she answered. And Adriana realized that he didn't want to leave her. Or maybe there was already a girl? Alex was handsome. It was not uncommon for girls to look at him. But Adriana didn't notice that her son was attracted to anyone. It was the separation from each other. They always took it hard. But Adriana didn't mind. She always knew when it came to Alex, she was a little crazy. And she wants to be in front of him all the time. But you can't do that. You have to fight it. And Alex, when he was once given to summer camp, came home on the 4th day. In the evening after lights out, he climbed out of the window and walked along the highway all night. "What have you done?" she aghast when the sun appeared on the doorstep. "I don't want to stay there. You have to do everything together. You have to be in front of me all the time." Walking in formation in the cafeteria, sitting all together, sleeping in a room. And the most important thing is that you don't have yourself there. Adriana looked at him with a sad smile. "But you have to become independent. I won't always be Radha. You're growing up. Independent, but not a cog in the machine. And I want to be there for you, as long as I can. If you asked me to, I'd come and get you. Now you and I are going to have to take the blame. I'll say I made the whole thing up and you didn't know. And I took it and left. First of all, that's the truth. And secondly, I'm not going to let you get scolded because of me." That's what Alex was all about. He was always trying to keep her out of trouble. But as time went on, the older the boy got, the more and more. An agonizing feeling grew on Adriana's soul. Although outwardly the family looked quite prosperous affluence, lack of quarrels, weekends, the three of them were often seen together. They spent time together, sometimes in nature, sometimes they went to the theater or to the premiere of a movie. At all this, Adriana realized that there was Frank, and there was herself together with Alex. Two families in essence, and there was no need for anyone but him. And she, in turn, was the center of his interests, the center of his soul. It was as if Adriana was holding on to the edge of a cliff, and the abyss beneath it was called madness. There was no way this was going to continue. At the same time, she knew she couldn't open up to anyone, not a psychiatrist or a priest in confession. Maybe only Miranda, who herself had made craziness and mistakes at every turn, and therefore no one to judge. When Alex was in the graduating class, there was a girl with him, with whom all the teachers had been tormented for long school years. She always did not find common language with her classmates, made a drama out of any trifle of his. Now because the teacher, in Nancy's opinion, gave her an unfair grade, the girl decided to jump out of the window from the 3rd floor. Almost 100%. It was staged. All Nancy wanted to do was open the frame, stand on the windowsill, promise to step down in front of the whole school, and for the teacher to apologize and never lower her grades again. Then Nancy would graciously agree to stay alive. But Alex didn't understand such nuances. He returned from the cafeteria before the others. He saw Natasha open the window, and in 2 jumps he was next to her and jerked her classmate to the ball. He didn't remember it himself. What did I grab her by? By her hair, it turned out. Nancy hit the back of her head painfully and replayed the play on the fly. She threw a tantrum, saying he'd jumped her and beaten her. Tossed a lump swelling on the back of her head. Half an hour later, Nancy's mother joined the scandal, saying she would write a police report to Alex, put her on the register, and so on and so forth without end. The teachers, who hadn't seen the case, tried to find some kind of compromise. They couldn't blame Alex, who had never been seen doing anything like that. And at the same time, they realized that the girl's mother could get the school in trouble. Adriana was not feeling well that day. She had been thinking since morning that she should probably go to the doctor and have them prescribe her pills for depression. And then she was called back to school. They didn't go home with Alex, and ours was immersed in itself, and Adriana didn't ask him any questions. She understood the need to talk, to explain that this is how life happens. The best intentions could be misunderstood, but that didn't mean that people in trouble should be abandoned to their fate. But Adriana didn't have the strength to have these conversations now. And only when Alex had already gone to bed, he called her. "Do you believe me?" he asked Adriana. He did not specify what she should believe him, but she understood and nodded. "I love you," he said before closing his eyes. She still sat by his bedside until he fell asleep. Alex was small. Realizing that he had finally fallen asleep, she bent over him lightly, touched her lips to his hair, and said in a slightly audible voice, "I love you too. It's just that we missed each other in time." Frank was already asleep too, and no one saw Adriana close the apartment door behind her. She was never found. The next week passed in a confusion of searching conversations with the police and with the investigator. There was no sign of her and no leads. The woman walked out of the house and melted away for sure. Frank could not believe what had happened. He assured him that Adriana would be found. Maybe she had a friend they didn't know about, and she was now holed up at her place. Maybe it happens. She just decided to run away somewhere for a while, bought tickets or stopped a hitchhiker. But she'll be back because she has no one else but them. Miranda had already completely lost her sight by that time, distinguishing only light and darkness. When the police asked about her daughter, Miranda shook her head. "She is not coming back." "How do you know that?" "She contacted you." The policeman slept like that out of sight. Miranda's sightless eyes reflected infinite sadness. She would never leave the boy. If she chose to leave, it would be for good. But she was alive. Miranda did not answer. Hardest of all, Adriana's disappearance had affected Alex. The preschool stories resolved themselves. The teachers spoke to Nancy and her mother in a different tone. The young man's grief had taken a toll on his mother. No one would do it at this time. But Alex no longer cared about all these vicissitudes. For him, the whole world collapsed. Once, when he was very young, his own mother left like that, and now Adriana disappeared without a trace. Did he hear her words, "We've just missed each other in time"? Or was it one of those dreams that, for the rest of his life, he was sure were the holy truth? About what happened to his mother, Alex eventually found out. But Adriana's fate remained unknown. For the first time and forever, Alex had a fight with his foster father, without acting grief-stricken. "I know you have another woman long ago, another family on the side." Frank was amazed. He did not make excuses and asked, "How did you know?" Alex grinned bitterly. "The first time I saw you was by chance in the city. You knew that Adriana hardly ever leaves the house. Didn't try too hard to hide her passy. And then it wasn't hard to guess all those clients who could only meet in the evening or on weekends. All those business calls when you went into the other room with the phone. She knew her too meant wife. Not to me, she didn't. And if she did, it wasn't from me. I would never say anything to upset her. That was the whole point. The whole time you two were acting like two people in love, so there was no room for me. I couldn't interfere with your relationship. I was redundant 100 times. I wanted to take myself back to the orphanage. But I knew then Adriana would leave me and go with you." Alex turned pale. "And then you didn't care, did you? You just got yourself a new woman. A woman who loves me. And I couldn't leave Adriana. I felt she was going crazy, that any minute now she might have to go to the hospital. It wasn't because of me, it was because of you, son. I was full of venom because it's so small and she's so old." Adriana couldn't accept that. Alex raised his hand as if he wanted to slap his adoptive father. They stood against each other. Then the young man sat down and hid his face in his palms. Frank realized that he was crying. "I'm leaving," Alex said. "Thank God. Where to?" You think Adriana didn't want you to finish school, and you're about to start your exams. I finished school. I'm staying at Miranda's. She can't be alone right now. You're bringing your friend here, and you seem to have your own son. So you have a lot to compare your feelings for your own kid to someone else's. What's the advice? Love. Miranda took Alex in like he was meant to live here. This was Adriana's home. Now it's your home too, she said. Alex fell from zero and by heart at those words. Even his mother had talked about Adriana in the past. But living with Miranda seemed easy to him. She had retained her character even to old age. She took little to heart and was not afraid of anything, not even death. In the house, she learned to move by feel her very rarely crashed into something Ronaldo brewed coffee in an automatic coffee maker, generously added to a cup of brandy. She listened to music, sometimes quietly singing and dancing. On weekends, she often had friends over. And if you didn't look into the room, but listened to the laughter, the shouts of melody, you could think that a young company gathered there. Frank, whom Alex had never once called father. He did exactly as Alex had predicted. He brought in a young girl, Maria, who had long been his real wife and had borne him a son, Sam. He found what he was looking for. Maria worked in a company for his partner, sat in the office one smile, and I was worth 1 million. And himself did not understand why she agreed to date him, and then for years resigned herself to the role of mistress. I want the real thing. After all this surrogate, just the real 1 million men screaming saying the wife is sick, and that's why they can't file a divorce. I know you're not lying, and that you desperately want to leave a family that doesn't appreciate you, but you don't. Your dad is really sick, and you can't take care of her as a boy. But there will come a time when you'll be free, and then you'll be with me. And not because I'm young and pretty, but because you love me. I can see that. If I'm 1 in 1 billion, there's only 1 in 1 billion like you. That's what Maria meant. He thought as he picked out gifts for various holidays. He was happy to do crazy things for her, buy expensive rare things, and get something for Adriana and Alex. When Maria gave birth to Sam, Frank felt for the first time that life had found meaning. Sometimes they lay down and dreamed about how they would live, where they would go, what they would do. But there was no telling when it would all happen. Maria, with a smile, lowered him from heaven to earth. What exactly? When and how? But God will not punish us. It's not like we wish the war any harm. We just want it to go away on its own somehow, right? Maybe she'll fall in love and go off with someone else. He shook his head. She's already fallen in love, and it's incurable. Frank sobbed at the wake he had decided to hold for Adriana. She was still missing. He agonized, waiting for the denouement and wishing for some kind of closure. You can search for years, so we're looking for one woman. The musician left the house, went for a walk in the evening, told her mother that she would buy bread at the same time, and nobody has seen her since. If not found within the first few days of disappearance, get ready for it to take a long time. But Frank could wait no longer. He summoned acquaintances of distant loved ones, and in their presence cried Adriana as if dead. I'm sure she'll never be found again. Everything was leading up to it, and the state of mind, lately tears, depressed with fat. In short, freak out, said a mutual acquaintance, who herself had views on Frank all her life did not work. So she went off the rails. Alex, of course, did not attend the wake. The next day, Frank brought home Maria and his son, and closed the door behind him, and locked the young woman in his arms. Freedom, freedom. Maria, we are finally free. Do you believe it? A few weeks later, they left for the sunny south. The trip they'd long dreamed of. Frank was right. His own son didn't bother him one bit. From time to time, once every few months, Frank called Alex, spoke in a polite, neutral voice, asked if everything was all right. If Alex needed anything, maybe some money to give. To all questions, the young man answered, "Thank you, I don't need anything." In these first and most difficult years, his grandmother became Alex's salvation. Sometimes they sat together near the fireplace, and Alex looked at the familiar features that had so much in common with his foster mother. Only with her. Miranda Alex had spoken to Adriana once. "You think she's dead?" he asked. "Then why haven't I ever seen you cry?" "Not even Frank. Why should I cry?" How long do I have left? We'll see each other soon anyway. At least in the other world. So you think he couldn't go on? Miranda put her hand on her chest, wore a few moments, definitely listening, then simply said, "I know, and how." There was a harshness in Miranda's voice, in the way she herself had decided. She never brought up the subject again. But Alex still long went to the river, to the place where, as they said, they had found the body of his own mother. He looked at the water for hours and waited for some epiphany. But the secret never came out. He did well on his exams. He could have shown. But with Adriana gone, everything in his soul was extinguished. Average grades were enough. Instead of the army, he did alternative service. Couldn't leave Miranda and didn't care that he was a pacifist. There was no problem. The city hospital needed orderlies badly. He helped carry the sick and did all the dirty hard work that is so necessary, which young people are so often reluctant to take on, especially for next to nothing. But Miranda had enough money that they were not in need. And Alex knew himself. To the material side of life, he wasn't demanding to the point of outrage. Miranda gave him complete freedom and never talked about the choice of further life path or marriage. "Sweet boy, you have your own head on your shoulders, and I'm too tired to take responsibility for someone else's life." She tried to serve herself to the last and asked surprisingly little to buy a bottle of her favorite cognac or bring a CD of this or that musician. And shortly before her death, she asked to take her to the sea and thinks that the old crust has finally lost its mind, said Miranda, and red hair with the same movement as when she was young. "I just want to say goodbye to my favorite corner." He became alarmed. "You don't feel well." She looked at him over her glasses, which had long since been practically useless. "If you're asking about the other side of the world, I'm off to a low start. But we'll get to the sea in time." It was one of the strangest trips of Alex's life. Miranda held him tightly under his arm and behaved in a way that people didn't immediately realize she could hardly see. They settled into a hotel simple and cheap on the beach itself, so that, sitting on the balcony, one could hear the noise of the sea. This accommodation had one disadvantage: the embankment under the windows. In the evening, from each cave carried its own music, smelled kebabs, fried corn, some spices. They were selling bottled beer, swings were flying up into the sky. Miranda sat on the balcony with a cigarette until dawn. "A real extravaganza. That's what I wanted," she said. They came back. The summer ended. And in the fall, Miranda fell ill, and 2 days later she was gone. The writer's house, where she had lived most of her life, she bequeathed to some charitable foundation, and left Alex the apartment she had once bought for herself and her daughter. Alex worked in the emergency services. At one time, he thought about medical school. He had already seen a lot, but at the same time felt that he couldn't live 24 hours a day for the sick. Like the few doctors he admired, he needed at least some time alone with himself, with his thoughts, with his soul. He worked shifts at the emergency ministry. There was no special romance. Most of the time they called him to open the doors of apartments locked by carelessness. Sometimes asked to take down from the tree favorite cat or cat. To rescue a favorite animal from trouble. In the heyday of overseas disease, ambulances were knocked down and often had to help transport heavy patients to the hospital. Sometimes worked in conjunction with firefighter divers. Maybe Alex went into this field because he hoped to learn something about Adriana. At least from someone's memories, maybe a broken thread would lead to where we are now. In his free time, Alex often wandered the streets. He was brought to those parts of the city where the yards resembled wells and the houses were barely holding on from old age, and it was obvious that they were about to be demolished. Narrow streets, the smell of damp. He spoke to these houses to himself, of course, lest he be thought crazy. Touching the palm of his hand, the rough walls. Asked to himself if they had heard that about Adriana. Then the city decided to lay a new subway line. That's what they said. 6 dozen houses were going to be demolished because they couldn't withstand the underground tracks. The usual squabbles began, cynical on the one hand and desperately fruitless on the other. People who had lived in these houses for a century resisted moving, especially since they were always offered minimal money, just enough to buy a shabby house somewhere in the suburbs. Alex knew what would happen next. People would be evicted from their homes anyway. They would be demolished on the empty places. They would build elite buildings that would not be hindered by any subway and sell them for 3 times the price. Some people accepted it and left. Others said that they would not leave their homes until the last. Let them be bulldozed together with them. They were talking about stone buildings. Alex remembered that when they were going to demolish houses, wooden people showed similar intransigence. The dwellings were simply burned down. Who was doing it? No one knew. They never found the end of it. The houses were always burning at night. There were times when people couldn't escape in time. Once they saved a mother and her children. Some rare medicine for the youngest child was not pulled out of the fire. The other day, volunteers gave an announcement about collecting money in social networks to buy this drug. And now Alex has been called to one such house. There the grandmother disappeared, does not come, and in the room crying. The child explained on the phone an agitated woman. We already wanted to break the doors, but decided not to act ourselves. Let the professionals, so that we are not accused of anything bad later. You did absolutely right. The dispatcher responded. Opening a lock, old doors is not such a big job. And Alex didn't think he'd be here long. He'd never been down this street before. If Miranda were alive, she would have explained to him that this was the very house and the very communal apartment where he and Adriana used to live. A woman of about 42, in a shabby robe, met him in the entryway. The grandmother lives with us, the grandmother who came here. Honestly, I agree to move just to get rid of such a neighborhood of rats. She breeds them. Imagine others are poisoned, but she breeds the whole house with her own hands, and they run away from her. Ew. Alex was already climbing the stairs, and we warned her that we will call the station, or as it is now called, the office, and all this contingent eliminate. So she put the critters in a bag today and went to the market. She says she's gonna give it away to people. Who's gonna get their hands on that filth? You know, every time she leaves the house, I hope in my heart that she won't come back. She's not an old woman, she's a witch. And then she's gone. And then we hear someone crying in the room. We start knocking, but there's only sobs. Then we called the Ministry of Emergency Situations. Alex answered in the words of the dispatcher. You did the right thing. That's what I think. And maybe when you open the door, we still call some service. Let them examine the room in your presence and take pictures. Impose some kind of fine on the grandmother for sanitary condition. We'll see there. This is the door. This is it. Alex noticed that he was surrounded by several women. They were curious neighbors. Apparently, the old lady didn't let them into her room, and they didn't know what was being done there behind the door. He took out his tools. It was quiet behind the door. It didn't take Alex more than a minute to open it. Perhaps the roommates immediately noticed the situation, like the rodent rats stirring on the back of the table. Perhaps Alex only saw the girl standing in the back of the room. 2 short pigtails, just below her shoulders, a museum dress. The way children were dressed long ago. Breasts. The girl was cradling a large gray rat that didn't seem to be trying to get away. The girl was the spitting image of Adriana, as he had seen her in pictures. The resemblance was so complete that he closed his eyes. Look, you're a child. Where did she get her from? The girl is your grandmother's own grandmother, yes. Remembered behind the neighbor's back. We were again separated in time. I wanted to say Alex and could not. Instead he asked, what's your rat's name? It's Love, said the girl. That's right.